broadcasted from coast to coast through the magic of video conference and simultaneous interpretation. So people all throughout Canada will be able to follow Mr. Kiri's presentation, who I'll introduce shortly. So thank you. Welcome to those who are online. We are many here in person, but we are greeting the people online who are now with us from coast to coast. So you're joining a conference that's called Initiation to the Prioritization Grid of the Goals in Sustainable Development. This conference is offered by Tounao Kiri in the Francophonie Institute for Sustainable Development. And this is organized by the EDS of Université Laval. So Mr. Tounao Kiri, he's a state engineer in automation in Algeria, and he was specialized in energy planning and operations and programming. He's responsible of programming. He was there in 2009. He was a program coordinator. He has a master's in systemic analysis in sustainable development from the University of Chicoutimi. He was named assistant in April 2019 and main senior coordinator since March 2021. So I will let the mic to Mr. Kiri, who will offer us a conference that will last about 30 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A period afterwards. So, Mr. Kiri, thank you very much. Hello to all. I hope that you can hear me well. Those who are in the room and those who are online. It's a great pleasure that I answer this invitation. It's the third time I'm here. It's always a pleasure to be at Université Laval, where I learn a lot each time I come. So it's an honor to present this tool. So I don't know if it's a training or a presentation, but I'll make a presentation and let's see if it becomes a training with all the different interactions. So I'll talk about this tool, but before, let's ask the question, why prioritize targets for Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs? And we'll talk about the history and the tools. And so let's start. So why prioritize targets for Sustainable Development Goals? So why prioritize the targets? So this morning, there were presentations on the 2030 program, so I won't go on this subject. So this is a presentation from someone who's in the room. I'll introduce that person later. So the 2030 agenda, above all, it's a planning program. It's as if the first time in the world, we're adopting a plan. And we're deciding that this plan is good for all the countries. So I know where in some countries planning is a problem. So usually planning is for communist countries, not for liberal countries. But now we have a plan, and we're saying that this plan, we need to adopt it. And it has a certain number of characteristics. And these characteristics will lead to a problem as a plan. First, we have a vision and principles. And one of these principles is let's not forget anyone. So I'll talk about inclusiveness and all the different actors. So how can you plan, regardless of the scale, by including everyone? The rich, the poor, women, young, the handicapped, indigenous people, the non-indigenous. So how will you plan this? How will you make sure that you haven't forgotten anybody? That's one of the challenges. Secondly, the notion of common responsibility, but still different. This notion comes from 1992, from the Climate Convention, that says the countries in Appendix 1, those who are responsible of the emissions, are the first responsible of the problems in the environment, and they have the responsibility to give the example and to pay in order to others should to adapt. So if you want to do it locally, you need to have this principle in your head. So I'll talk about interdependence. The second element is the 5 Ps. So there are 5 Ps around the program: the population, so the social dimension, the planet, so the environmental dimension, prosperity, so economic side, and the 2030 program added partnership and peace. So partnership, so it's regarding governance. So we only have one planet, we need a governance system, and peace. And peace is governance, and partnership is relates to equity and common responsibilities. So those who are responsible for the problems, but now we need to manage this all together. So this is the first problem. Secondly, it's 169 targets and 244 indicators. So how do you plan on all of this? So I'll remind, so there used to be 8 objectives, and so they were difficult to implement. Now we have 169 targets and 244 indicators. How will you do this? Thirdly, implementing, ways of implementing. So implementation, I've heard this earlier in the debate. So we talked about the partnership and implementation. So the implementation at this scale of ambition, we estimated $2,500 billion annually. And we had $40 billion. So do the math. And there is a framework for the results. And this framework, I'll come back to this later. So this is the framework. This is the program itself. And this program, we're saying, we need to implement it nationally and in local communities. So this is how the architecture is made. So the implementation responsibility is first and foremost national. And we must not confuse national and government. It's national on a geographical scale. So it can be in local communities. It can mean provincial government here. It can also mean federal government. So these are the scales in which we can implement this. And why do I have this chart? It's because we need to adapt for each level. So 17 sustainable development goals, and we need to adapt them locally. So if I want to do this in Bikomo, how should I do this? So I have an anecdote here, and this is where the idea came from. So 540 experts in this room are negotiating the SDGs. They're arguing over every concept and every word, and now we want it to be implemented in one community when everybody, so the local blacksmith, the local firefighter, the local police person, so he wasn't in that room, he doesn't know what peace is, what war is, and you want that person to adapt this, and he adapts it well. So I said, we need to reflect on how to do this. After that, when you take a sustainable development goal, SDG, so it's easy to say, but a SDG is first and foremost a slogan. For example, so the objective 2 is zero hunger. So we had a concern to have a formulation that everybody could remember. One example, there were 6 negotiation sessions on the concept. And I'd like to tell this story. The day that we finished the discussions on the concept of poverty, the president of the session was from Kenya, and he said, we all agree, we want to do something simple. Subject, verb, and complement. We agree. So I just made a synthesis. So the concept of poverty, you included 30 notions in there. Energy in poverty, territory in poverty. How can I create a single sentence with 30 concepts without forgetting anybody? So there was this concern to simplify things. So that's why we chose a slogan. But in reality, a SDG is a question of formulation. So the second goal is zero hunger. Make sure we have food safety. Promote sustainable agriculture. And I'll ask a question. Is it one SDG or is that 4 SDGs? But that was a formulation, and that's a second issue. We needed to have a technical balance and a political balance. In this wording, there's a political balance. So there was a consensus that this SDG must be written in this way. But for the planners, you know that's not an SDG, that's not a goal, that's 4 goals. So after that, we needed to create targets. And there was a big debate. Do we create operational targets or implementation targets? So countries from the South insisted that in each SDG, we'd have implementation targets. So they wanted operational targets. That's why we came to a political consensus. So we have operational targets that are noted. So 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and implementation targets 2A, 2B, 2C. So what are the things that we should implement to reach those SDGs? So if I don't reach my SDG and you haven't given me money, you can't say it's my fault. So we'll check what you gave me, and after you can judge me. So that's as simple as that. And the indicators that go with each target. So that's a SDG. And we're asking you to plan it and adapt it at your local level. You see the issue there, and that's not over. Mr. David Leblanc, he's at the United Nations, inaudible to the interpreter, and he started the negotiations. He created this chart, and this chart shows the interactions between the SDGs and the targets. And the conclusion here is to say the SDGs are indissociable. You cannot say I'm taking one SDG and it's the only one I'll take. So conceptually, I cannot work on only one SDG. You cannot do that. And I always like to tell this story. So when a representative told me, no, what I want is a food program. That's what interests me. So the SDG number 2. Okay, I understand. So you generally give your food to refugees. So refugees, you bring in food. They need water. Yes, sure. So water is SDG 6. They need power. Yeah, that's SDG 7. We have health problems. That's the third one. So we're using a forest. That's number 15. Okay, I understand. So you cannot work on only one SDG because it's interdependent. So when you look at all of this, and we tell you we need to adapt it to your own context, how will you do that? And this is why we said we need to develop a tool to learn to prioritize. How can we prioritize? This is the basics, the building blocks of the tool. And when we started thinking about this, so we said, well, we'd call it the Atlas. We're going to prioritize the SDGs. And we talked about many actors. There are two here, Mr. Monfils. I cannot tell you the number of times that we talked about this. And David Tremblay, who's just near him, he was at the Université du Québec in Chicoutimi, and we reflected and we got to this grid of prioritization. So what is this grid? So first, the history. It's inspired by the assessment grid in sustainable development developed by Mr. Claude Villeneuve in Chicoutimi. And the first exercise is a colleague who's called Kiri Tounao, and he did this in Senegal. And he prioritized the SDGs. And after that, we told him, that's not what you needed to do. So we've evolved to prioritize the targets, because that's a bit more complicated. Now the grid was developed in partnership with the chair in ECHO Council and the Institut, with many round trips in many countries. And in 2016, we came across a problem that was in Burkina Faso. The local communities, the mayors and the local representatives told us this doesn't work with us, especially SDG 17. So we gave a mandate to a private structure that's called Global Shift, that adapted this to local communities. So we came to the tool of today that's been improved, and we've applied it in around 50 countries in Europe, Central Africa, and here in Quebec. So here it's a proven tool, it's recognized in a lot of countries, and what we haven't done yet is propose it to the UN. We've tabled this grid at the UN, and the UN has it, but we don't have the confirmation, because they use it in many countries, but we don't have the certificate yet. So what is this grid? It's a grid, it's a tool. First of all, for information and prioritization. So next slide, please. So first of all, it's to inform and raise awareness. So when we will cover the grid, I'll show this. You will ask question target by target for each SDG. So when you'll get to the finish, you'll really know the targets. So that was the idea, is having an awareness around the tool, and people make that tool their own. Second one is a dialogue tool, so people will discuss on different targets, and we'll see later why I'm talking about a dialogue. And it's also a diagnostic tool. So when you apply it, you deepen the diagnostic in your environment, whether it's the territory or on a national level. And it's a tool to help decision making. It doesn't decide in your place. It gives you the elements, it clarifies, so you can make a decision in terms of planning. So this is the grid in the summarized grid. So at the heart of the tool is prioritization. How did we do this? In the first place, and I got here at the right time, so first of all, we have the premises. So to prioritize, you must know the context in which you do it. If you do it locally, what's the situation locally? If it's a local plan, you need to identify the programs, the policies, the strategies that are already in place, or those who are being prepared. So programs and plans, and so you need documents, and you must read that, because if you don't have it, you won't be able to work correctly. After that, you need to identify the analysts who will work with you. So there's where there's an issue in representativity. Who prioritizes? So it's up to you to determine who will prioritize. So you need to have decision makers. You need sectoral experts in health, education, environment. You need also the civil society. So major groups, women, young people. So it's up to you to see what's the sample that will represent, not in terms of elections, but representative of your environment. So this sample will lead to prioritization. So this is the method in 6 steps. The first part, you need to assess the importance of the targets, establish a performance, and analyze the competencies. But these are not steps in silos. So it's an iterative process. You need to go back and forth. And it's a passionate work. And everywhere we did this, when people start, we say, let's take a break. They say, yeah. But when they start, they cannot stop. So what's the importance? So what's the level of importance of the target in that region? So if I take target number 1 of SDG 1, we must ask ourselves, what's the importance? And this is a subjective notation. Each person must say, it's really important to me, or it's not that important, or... So everybody has their own opinion, but the importance here is that you need to reach consensus. You cannot go with the average. Why do you need consensus? It's so you can listen to everybody. And I love to tell this story, and Mr. Monfils mentioned this. We worked with the president of a country. And when he decides, well, the others say, yes, Mr. President, let's go on. And there's a woman who was resisting, and she said, SDG 5 for women, it's not good. But we needed to make him understand that if we do what you say, it's great for the rights of women. So the Justice Department is not a priority. He said, no, that's not what I meant. So it's a tool that allows you to be objective. Otherwise, you miss your assessment in terms of performance, and that's why documents are important. You'll need to real state of things, and so we could give scores, and then we can make an average. So it's with importance and performance that you'll have a level of priority. And so the priority, the more the SDG is important, and the least its performance is important, the less it's relevant. And the more the SDG, so the more the performance is strong and the SDG is weak, so this color code will be shown as far as when you're creating the scores. And this process comes from the team. You prioritize, you note the performance, and the color code sets in. So we see here, you see the columns, and each time you give a notation on the importance, you'll need to motivate your answer. So what are the issues? So I would have liked to do it with Excel, but it's not possible right now. So that's the idea. The more you note, you identify the issues at the same time. And you can discuss between analysts. And maybe Karen's issue is not the same issue for Stéphane. So Karine needs to convince Stéphane and the other way around. And you'll agree on one issue, and that's the territorial issue. When the mayor says, we need a road that goes through this forest, and some citizens say no, so we need to see the issues. So why does the mayor think this? Is it an economic issue? Is it a access to? So why do the neighbors don't want? Because I want a park to take a walk with my kids. So you need to discuss what's better, health or a walk with your kids. So it's important to agree. And this tools allows to discuss about this. So you have the importance from 0 to 3. So you can note the opportunities and the threats. And after that, you can look, so are you competent to do this? Especially in the communities from 1 to 4. And if you're not competent, why? So you need to assess the strengths and weaknesses, and what are the action strategies. So you will discuss this together. So this is the summary of the prioritization. So for the competencies, it's the same thing. It's noted in each column. So you note the competencies, the strengths and weaknesses. So in the end, you have the action strategies. So in the end, you have a complete SDG like this in terms of notation. So in reality, when you get to the end, you have drafted your plan. You only have to finalize it. You have everything, the strengths and weaknesses. So that's why we say it's a diagnosis tool. And when you're at the end, so I'll give you an example. This is one example. So I think it comes from Togo. So you have all the SDGs that are noted. So you have urgent targets, non-priority targets, and so you can have an overview of all the targets. So you can have it by SDG. So in each SDG, you can see the diagnosis by targets, and don't forget that targets are themes. So I have, for example, 3 urgent targets, and I have nothing here, so you can find it there. And you'll see there are targets to consolidate. So this allows you to see everything, and it's starting from there that you will create the vision and the action plan. So now that's the end of the tool. So now you're the decision maker. It's up to you to interpret all of the results. So this is an example of the assessment. So when I look at this, I have urgent targets, I have priority targets, and I have midterm and long-term targets, things to consolidate, and there's non-priority targets and non-relevant priorities. So what do you decide? I've seen cases where people say, I'm working on the urgent and priorities because I don't have money for the rest. So you're forgetting the other ones. If you're forgetting certain aspects, you will move backwards. So in 5 years, for example, your health and education will drop. So it's important to consolidate, but that's up to you to make a decision. It's not the tool, it's not someone else. And I'll go even further. This is the level where the analysts have finished their jobs. So here you have everything, you decide. And that's where, and the chief will decide because he has all of the elements to make a decision. So that's the role of the tool. So it's a decision-making, it's a decision, it helps decision-making, it allows social inclusion, and it's a word that scares me, but it even involves political inclusion, because if I'm planning in one local community, maybe I should listen to the opposition, even if the opposition is small, because maybe their ideas are good for the community. So it's an inclusion tool. So that's what I can say regarding this tool. So I don't know if this was a training, but if you want to know more, you can go on the IFDD website, and we've developed this as a digital platform that's also accessible. So people can apply this remotely with different stakeholders. So I'm sorry I went over time. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Kiri, you still have a bit of time. You were quite concise. So you still had 7 minutes, but we could already skip to the Q&A period. So for the Q&A period, Mr. Kiri would like a few questions in advance, and maybe some questions might be related, so you could, and I'd like to say that people online, you can ask questions in the conversation tool. It can be in English and French, so I will translate them quickly, and I'll transmit them to Mr. Kiri. So let's start with a first question in the room. Yes, it's a bit more information. I'd like to inform the people who are online, who are listening in English, that through the project that we've implemented, these tools are available in English also. So the goal of this presentation was to inform the people who might be interested, so they can examine the tools on the website of the Institute, but also, and also there are training that come with the realization of this grid. So they will be available soon in English for the international community that could benefit from this. Thank you, Liliana. And I'd like to add that people here, we have your email and contact information, and people online also. So you will receive, I'll repeat this later, but you'll receive an email with all the resources that were mentioned. And the prioritization grid, we talked about this this morning a bit quickly, but it was used in the context of, it was used by the City of Quebec, and with the Baie-Saint-Paul also. And so this was used here in Quebec, of course. So we have a question, Mr. Forget. Hello, Mr. Kiri. It's great to see you again. So an element that I'd like to add, and I'm sorry to compliment your presentation. I've used this with stakeholders in Senegal in 2017 when we studied together. And I thought that the activity to creating the SDG targets, so I remember a comment that we've added in our master's work. Someone said, it's really interesting. I didn't know about SDGs before, and now I can teach them. And I have a question for you. And unless I wasn't listening, you didn't speak about the third variable, the one on the skills and competencies. And I was wondering if it was still part of this. So the local or regional competency. So probably you didn't have enough coffee, because I think he talked about this. Maybe you can have a coffee during the break. I have a question for you. with the experience of using this in different communities, what are the main obstacles and difficulties? So for people who want to implement this and use the tools, what are the topics on which we need to be vigilant, because that's where we can have the most difficulties? So the question will be noted. We'll take a few questions. And so you can step up to the mic. Mr. Kiri likes to have a few questions in advance, and so now he can, and after he can answer globally. So we'll go in blocks of 4 questions. You can go ahead. So I have one question and one testimony and one comment. I'll start with the testimony. When Mr. Kiri said that somewhere in one country where they wanted to experiment the tool, and that's when things became complicated and we needed to readapt things. And I was there in Burkina Faso, and I remember quite well Mr. Monfils had even so I was part of that team. So, and congratulations for the reactivity in adapting the tool in that community. You talked about political inclusion. So we've supported another municipality for prioritizing the targets. And for the first time, we've included citizens so they could discuss with the decentralized services face-to-face to say this goes well and this won't, this doesn't work. So we've positioned actors in different positions so they could say, yes, this will work. So we have societies with certain obstacles. So seeing people defending their own interests, that is quite remarkable. And so this is my question. And we spoke about this earlier. And I'm wondering today, how can we do and what can we say so the partners that finance or fund or who operationalize the activities of the NGOs in certain countries can integrate in their activities the implementation of the SDGs. So by level, we've seen testimonies here by different actors. So how can these people can work together? And so if we run alone, we can run faster, but if we run together, we can go further. So people must understand that it's a common goal, and it's not just a way to get funding. Thank you. Thank you. One more question? So maybe with the person at the mic, and I'll have 2 online questions. So first of all, congratulations for your presentation. It was quite instructive. I never heard about this, and I'll come out of this with more knowledge. So it's not a question, it's more, could you illustrate, talk about a success that was implemented following the use of this tool? So a personal experience or a case that you had the opportunity to study or in which you participated, because I think that it's quite theoretical, and I'd really like to know, in reality, I'd like to know about a success story after using this tool. Thank you very much. So Mr. Kiri took note of the questions. So yes, these are inspiring questions. And yes, Daniel, it's true. It's a dialogue tool. So people can appropriate the concepts, and it's deliberate because the SDGs were conceived so they can be appropriated, because the OMDs were created by experts in Washington and it became global. And it didn't solve any problem. So the negotiators said this time, we need to make sure that the goals are well accepted by everyone. And that's why in the grid, you will read and ask questions about the targets at least 4 times. So about the importance, you'll read the target, you will ask yourself questions. In terms of performance, you will read it again and ask questions. In terms of competencies, you'll read it again and ask questions again. So in the end, each target for each SDG you will have discussed, you will have fought at least 4 times. And that's why in the end, that person said, I can teach it. I'm not sure if he can teach it, but it's not false what he said. And we asked the question about skills, and yes, we talked about that. I'll buy you coffee afterwards. So about the obstacles and difficulties. So there are contextual difficulties. For example, in the countries of the South, and especially in Africa, people are saying SDGs, that's a white people's thing. So that's why they're bringing these SDGs. And this is quite heavy for a presentator. So we must explain that the planet is burning up, and let's don't care about who came up with this. So maybe in the north, there are people who are saying, so when I talk about access to power, so in Canada, you're at 90%, maybe 100% access to energy. So for you, it's not access that's a problem, it's the quality. But when I talk to people in Burkina Faso, it's not the quality, it's access. So when you have a debate over the priorities, there's a risk of biases. And the second most important risk, and that's quite general. So it's a tool that we use to prioritize the planning. So naturally, every participant wants to... So if you have an expert that's a specialist in education, he will say that education must be a priority. So everybody's pulling on the cover on their side. So that's the main difficulty. It's the biases. So that's why the host of the tool must remain neutral and must integrate pedagogy. I talked about the judge in Togo. And I had to demonstrate to him, listen, is justice important? He said, of course, yes. That's number 3. But performance, are you performant? Yes, at least 80%. So it can become a long-term objective. So when it becomes an issue over the long term, it's not a priority. He said, yes, it's a priority. So you need to assess this better. So is your performance this high? Well, we have a few gaps still. So this comes back to the question, to the testimony that we had earlier. You've seen people discuss, and someone told me in one country, Mr., you are really strong because you've managed that people talk about corruption. They're talking about corruption and they're not fighting. And that's one dialogue issue. So we need to avoid these biases. How can we bring the partners for funding? And maybe the answer I can say, and this is important, we need to get out of the biases that sustainable development will be created by others. So when a community will prioritize the targets, how will that community use its own money so it can be sustainable? And after that, they will move towards other funding. So you need to look at your own budget between turn towards funding. So how do you use your own money? And when you will use your own money well, the eventual partner will be encouraged to support you. I've seen a case in Togo where 4 or 5 communities have done this. And some of them said, and a funder said, I have money, but I only give it to those who have a plan. So we have plans, but we don't have the money. And I had the same narrative with others. I told them there are 3 communities involved, but the funder, we don't have a funder, you're the president. Give to your own communities. So that's the problem about funding. We need to ask ourselves the proper question when we do this type of exercise. We plan for yourself in the first place, and after that, the partners can help us. And your question was, at what scale did we use the tool? So you wanted to hear about success stories. Well, everywhere we use this in 50 or 60 communities. They're proud of their local plan in terms of sustainable development. I didn't hear one community yet that had any regrets. On the contrary, I've seen countries that receive funding from a funder that had their own tools. And the country said, no, we were trained by the Francophonie, your tool is too complicated, we prefer the other. So they call me to come and give training, and I say, how am I collaborating? I talk to the funder. So we've presented the 2 tools to see the pros and cons of each tool, and the partner said, we are complementary. So it's a tool. And so they don't decide, but it gives you elements to make a decision. So it's like the key to my car. I can start my car and I start, but if I don't choose to use it, I need to start another way, find another way to start my car. So everywhere I've used the tool, it's been positive. I think I've covered all the questions now, and I have 3 short questions from people online. So I had the time to translate it. Are there any funds available to implement this tool in a country, and who should we contact, first of all? As a simple citizen, what's your advice to start a discussion at the municipal level to implement the SDGs in my municipality? And the third one is in the same vein. In using the prioritization grid, can we limit ourselves to a few SDGs, or should we assess all of the SDGs every time? Great question. So are there funds anywhere, and who to contact? Well, globally, there are funders that are sensitive to SDGs and support local communities. And I know that in Europe, there's an organization, inaudible to the interpreter. So they changed these strategic frames. Now they have a new framework. Here in Canada, I know that on the federal level, they finance these types of activities. In Quebec, I don't know. So there are funders that are bi and multilateral. So you need to research this. Some support countries, some support NGOs. So you need to do your own research. I don't have a comprehensive list, but you can find those on the internet. And as a citizen, who should I talk to? In my opinion, the first person you should talk to is your own community. So every community has a framework to collaborate with their citizens, so that's where you should turn. In terms of priorities, so you can say, I have a problem with the municipal dump. And if I have a problem with the municipal dump, so does the city have a policy? And where is that policy? Is there a plan that talks about the development of the city regarding that municipal dump? If not, we need to talk about planning. So a citizen can bring that question, but it depends on the municipal executive. Does the executive want a plan? And I'm most certain that in Quebec, all the municipalities have a plan. But now the question is, does this plan integrate the SDGs? And if not, I'd advise the municipality to get into this subject, because you'll discover many things. So that's something that would be my advice to all municipalities. The last question was on the limits. Well, can we work on only a few SDGs, or should we work on all of them? The answer is no, because the SDGs are indissociable. You cannot separate them. Let's take SDG number 1, it's poverty. SDG number 2 is hunger, and you want to work only on number 2. And number 3 is health. If you talk about hunger without health or poverty without health, you'll have a problem. SDG 4 is education. So can you talk about hunger and poverty without education, and so on and so on? And SDG 5 is gender equality. 6 is water. 7, so everything is linked. So if you want to prioritize, my advice is cover all the 17 SDGs. So you will be able to discover questions that you even ignored. You can even discover that your problem, the cause is elsewhere. It's not where you think it is. It's not what's evident in front of you. The problem is maybe elsewhere because you didn't ask the good question. So that's why interesting to cover all the SDGs and all the targets. And the person online is thanking you for the answer. So before moving to Mr. Forget's question, there's another question is, how can we train on this tool? So there will be a MOOC, that's an online training that's accessible to all. This will be offered in French and in English, so we can use the prioritization grid. You'll receive this information in the post-event email. So I answer the questions. This question, Mr. Forget. I'll try to be more focused this time, and it's not even a question, it's just a complete. So everything that's been said is true, and the horizontality. So people who talked about corruption with the mayors, we had frank discussions in a neutral environment. So what's important? You asked the question, what is the success story? And I think that the idea of using the grid as coming in with a framework, we said it's a white people framework, but the consultant comes in and the consultant leaves afterwards. So what's left of the knowledge? So it's the reflexes that will be developed in the community. So the example I have, we have a chief doctor that was disappointed that we didn't prioritize SDG number 3 in health. And after a day and a half of prioritization, he took the mic and said, Daniel, give me the mic. I think I understood. We're talking about synergy and antagonism. We want to promote synergy among different actors. So synergy, he said, I just understood. As a chief doctor in my region, I'm working on certain illnesses, and when I go in villages with my toolkit, so I see stagnant water. This brings mosquitoes, and mosquitoes bring malaria. So in certain villages, I saw the kids jumping in the puddles of waters. So, Forget, you're telling me that if I had done this during 15 years with colleagues from education, so my actions would have been more done in synergy. Exactly. So that's 1 + 1 = 3. So we asking people in communities to reflect on this and to reflect. So the local people are the experts. We still have a few minutes to go. We'll take a last question. I have a short question. You mentioned that the performance assessment had to be done in an objective way. And how does this work? So do we have levels to reach to say that we're at 1, 2, 3, or 4? Thank you. So I'm sorry, I don't think we'll have the time to take a last question, but maybe you could pursue the exchanges because we have a busy agenda. So performance is noted from 1 to 4. So 1 is not good, and 4 is the best. So you're 5 analysts. So let's get to the total. Let's divide by the number of participants. But it's still based on documentation. So you need to assess the real situation. That's where you get to the performance. And I can find that education is super important to me, and my neighbor will say, no, what's important is food. And of course, he has the right to think this, but we need to discuss. So I need to convince him that if he's educated, he will get the food. So we need a consensus. And that's not mandatory in terms of performance, and that's from 1 to 4. We still have 1 minute. I don't know if it's a comment. One important thing is time. You need to put in the time when you apply the grid. We need to give ourselves the time to apply it. And that's a constraint. Sometimes people are pressed to get to a result, and they do not go they don't use the tool well. So take time. We've applied this grid in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has used it to create their national plan, and the targets that came out as priorities were integrated in the local development plan, and this was funded by certain partners. And we've implemented the plan in Algeria as part of the CAPDEL plan, and we've accompanied certain communities, and we've supported them. We've trained them on the way to construct their own plan with the grid. And these communities, a few months later, designed their plan and presented it publicly in front of their government, and they're still working on that. So that's a success story. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Kiri, do you want to add something? Maybe a closing remarks? The only thing I want to add is I want to thank your organization, because we need to promote this all throughout Canada. And to me, it's a pleasure to see people in this room using these tools. I would never imagine this before.